Hi everybody. Today I am here very excited to present to you the Itential Builder Skills. I am sharing the GitHub repo page right now. This is released a few days ago, I think a couple days ago. And it's super important for us and very exciting time because essentially what these Agentic Builder Skills do is they enable people to build automation and orchestration in the Itential platform by using spec-driven development. For those of you that are not familiar with spec-driven development, essentially the idea here is that now you can focus on what the automation needs to do rather than building the actual logic for the automation itself on anything, right? This applies to programming languages, products and platforms, or any others. In our case, this is very focused for Itential platforms. So focused on building things like automation platform workflows, building command templates, building configuration manager assets, building configuration templates, lifecycle manager assets, IAG services, Python scripts, Ansible playbooks integrated into the gateway, and so forth. There's a lot of capability here provided to this, and there's actually multiple skills that come along with it. This has been published into the Claude marketplace. For now, we're just going to be adding it straight from repo, but I actually want to work through the entire motion of adding this into my Claude setup and going and launching the spec creating a couple assets, right? One project with a simple workflow and an entry and so forth. And we'll discuss that in a minute. But first, let's go look at our setup. So I actually have a recording setup here. I have already created a env file, and the env file, I'm not going to show it because it has IPs and URLs and things like that, but essentially it consists of credentials to the platform as well as URLs and things like that that need to be used by Claude Code in this case, which is what we're going to be using as an agent. You could use anything that supports skills. You can use your OpenClaw, or you can use any of those things. As long as you support skills, then you should be good to go. I pass it an env file with the credentials that it will use. Make sure that my service account that I am using has enough permissions to execute the things that I want to do. In this case, I'm just going to be creating a project, adding a workflow, and creating operations manager entry with a form. That's it. And then I already have a spec created, and we'll look at that in a second. But the first thing that we want to do is I'm going to set up my environment. There should be only a couple of commands, and we're going to do that. So let's do, we're going to go into Claude, and I'm going to do something here that you shouldn't do. And the reason for that is because I want to speed this up. I want to avoid the permissions and all those things. So I'm in a secure environment, so I don't have a problem with this. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we want to add Itential / Builder Skills into the marketplace in Claude Code. So that's done. And then the next thing that I want to do is I want to add Itential Builder to my setup. Now, what I want to do is I want to install this for the user scope or for the project scope. So I can just install it here in the local scope. That'll work for what I want to do. And that's good. So now I'm going to do a reload plugins per the instructions. So now we have, and here we added a lot of stuff right here. And I don't have a lot of things in this setup. Like I said, I started a brand new project with no .claude folder or anything like that. And by adding this, I actually get 1 plugin, 13 skills, 5 agents, and so forth. And if I do skills, these are all the skills that I get. I get a builder agent. I get some of the native skills there. I get a flow agent builder. I get flow agent to spec. I get Itential devices, golden config inventory, etc. You can do a lot of stuff with this. Today we're going to keep it fairly simple. We're just going to focus on using the spec to build in our environment, and we're just going to launch that. So I'm just going to go ahead and launch it first, and then we're going to go back and revisit the skill because this will actually take a minute. And while we go through the actual spec that I have created, we're just going to let it rip. So let's see. Start building the project and automation entry with form trigger based on the spec file provided for DNS automation. with info blocks. And that's what we're doing. We're creating basic DNS automation in info blocks, and that's what the use case is. So I'm going to launch this, and that should just get going with the local context. Now, keep in mind that based on what it's going to do, and that's already kind of doing its thing, is, hey, it's pulled up the spec because it has local context of that directory where we launch. If you're experienced with Claude Code, the way that Claude Code works is it has a directory right in here. It downloads SDD demo recording. It'll have access to all the files on that on that directory, so it can read and it can do its own thing and all that. Now what it's doing is it's actually setting up an environment. It says the workspace doesn't have a bootstrap, so let me check what's available. It has the platform credentials. I need to bootstrap the whole workspace first. So the skill has already been set up to let it talk to the platform, let it authenticate, and let it do its whole thing. So there's a lot kind of went on into this, but this enables Claude Code to do everything that it needs to do in order to talk to your environment. So let it go through its whole thing and pick up all those tokens and all that. And let's go ahead and review the spec itself. So we're going to have, and we're going to focus on is on DNS A Record Provisioning. Super simple info blocks, right? I called it simple. And the reason for that is because I wanted to make sure that it happened quick and it kind of showcased the capability that we have. So one of the things that's super important about doing a simple use case like this is you could get very, very, very creative and very complicated into the flow, but we in Itential encourage doing minimal or doing simple flows for discrete functions. So this would be probably a component of the environment and the setup that you actually do. Notice also on the side that I only had the spec file and the env file. This is actually bootstrapping the whole environment, and it's creating a series of files, right? It's actually pulling a lot of data, especially things like, hey, I need to know what adapters are in your environment and so forth. So it'll go and do its thing. It'll keep creating files while we discuss this. So now this spec file, you may ask, okay, how do I create this? So of course you can create this by hand. This is a markdown document that has, kind of discusses what you want to see in your particular use case. But you could also design this as a bulleted list of things, or you could create an UML or a DRIO or anything like that. And this is where we want to leverage the power of reasoning with AI to say, hey, perhaps take that diagram, take my UML, or take my series of bullet points and translate them into a spec. The skills themselves that we just installed actually have the ability to manage and create specs, and not only the spec file itself, but also create solution designs, as built, and all those things that you need for proper documentation of your use case. Okay, without further ado, I'm gonna get into this because let's discuss what we're gonna build here. So what we have is I have a very specific use case. We're gonna be creating A records in info blocks, and the first thing that we specify is the entry point. So the entry point for us is gonna be a form. It's gonna be an operations manager. It's gonna be a manual trigger. It doesn't have the legacy wrapper, which is foreign data, so that's set to false. We're gonna have a form that's gonna be called DNS A Record Simple. I could go and edit all that stuff here. By the way, the repository, which we can link into the video description, will have lots of examples of these specs. So not to be concerned with, hey, I don't know what this needs to look like or anything like that. We'll provide examples, and of course, our teams are gonna be super sharp about using this and supporting our customers with their questions. The form is going to be the entry point. Operator fills in hostname, zone, IPv4, blah, blah, blah. So, and then the workflow, starts. It accepts all the variables that are filled up. Merge the FQDN and the A record name. So we're going to split up. One of the things that we had is, hey, we're going to have a drop down of all FQDN values that we want to use, and then we're just going to provide the host portion in the form, and then just to make sure that we have super crazy validation. And I did this by accessing the adapter and the configuration in the info box system. Then we can specify, okay, merge the FQDN vars, make the data, make the body for creating the A record, create the A record, success, get the data out of the record, perhaps some of the IDs and so forth, and then send an email, make a email using an email template, send the email, and then if there's an error, set a warning variable and end the workflow when you handle errors. Now this is a diagram with the flow of the whole chart. you can actually have this express as a list of bullet points, and then the skill would create the diagram itself. But just start thinking about, okay, this is actually how you design these use cases in words, right? So this is all in the user natural language, not necessarily expressed into, you know, super complicated words or super complicated diagrams or anything like that. As we keep scrolling down, there are some more details, right? It has some details about the entry point. Hey, there's going to be a JSON form bound to a manual trigger with blah, blah, blah. The legacy wrapper needs to be false. Platform messages that are going to be created. It's going to be a JSON form, operations manager form. There's going to be a workflow, going to be called DNS A Record, and a project. So we're going to put this inside of an Itential project. And that's how it's going to go. Then the project membership, and this is also super important because I want to make sure that sometimes if I'm using OAuth like I am with Claude Code, I want to make sure that it sets me, right? It says my UI user, which is my email, as the owner for the project so that I can modify, delete it, and so forth. And then also I add the solutions engineers group as editors as well. We have more details on the JSON form fields, and you can get as simple or as creative as you want with these, right? In some of this case, I want to have some, you know, fields that are mapping, and this feels very familiar for those that have done Itential development and have created JSON forms. This feels very, very, very familiar, right? You have your field key, which is a variable key. You have your label for your fields. You have your data type, the values required, any defaults, and then a description, some notes for it, and also validations and default values and things like that. Again, these can be specified in your spec, so you could actually build these by just having a bullet point that specifies all the parameters that you want as inputs, and then you can launch, you can pass that data, right, those bullet points to Claude, and Claude will actually use its skill to create the spec file first, which is the first step needed to then go ahead and launch that creation. It got a bunch of other details, right, like zone drop-down values. These are values that I pulled from my info blocks, and so on and so forth. And then some of the, you know, more involved data. Claude is quite good at actually figuring this out on its own, so you don't have to go into this level of details. But this is actually what's rendered from Claude Code. Now that we kind of summarize what we're going to do in our workflow, which is creating a DNS record, sending an email, having the entry point on operations manager, and so forth, let's go back and look at what Claude it's doing in the meantime. Okay, so this actually happened fairly quick. While I was explaining this, it actually built it all. So it says everything is deployed and verified. Here's the summary of what was built. Build complete, assets deployed, DNS A Record Provisioning simple. Project has been imported. There's a workflow with 10 tasks inside the project. There's an automation with a form trigger. And this is the workflow that I created. Merge, data merge, create a record. We're using info blocks, adapter ID info blocks, email, and we have a form. Okay, without further ado, let's go into the platform. Okay, so we have a project here added. It's called DNS A Record Provisioning Simple. It was added a couple minutes ago or a couple seconds ago. Let's go ahead and look at that. And voila. So we have a workflow. It's got a few tasks on it, and let's see that we can work through it. It's got a merge for building FQDN variables. It's build the FQDN, which is probably just taking and templatizing some of the data from the form. It creates the A record. It's got error handling in it. It extracts the reference from info blocks. It builds the variable, and then it'll send an email. And if I hit run, I should see the parameters that match the form in Operations Manager. Okay, so that looks good. Let's go into Operations Manager and look for our entry over there. Okay, awesome. So DNS A Record Provisioning is here. DNS A Record Provisioning is simple. And notice that it followed all the names in the spec as I was going through and discussing it. And it has who created it, right? Which is actually my IPCTL account, or my service account that I use for submitting things from my laptop via API. But this is perfect. So it actually has it tied into that workflow that we saw earlier from the project. It has a manual trigger. Let's see if we say run now. And I have done this before, so let's see web server. Oh, let's say 10, because I may have provisioned some of these, and now we have a drop down with all the assets that we need on the form. That's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and do new zone 1, some comment, testing DNS A record and info blocks, and we're gonna do another IP, 172.16.825.35. DNS view is just default, and then the TTL is 3600. And let's go ahead and launch that. And it actually seems like it did it all. And it sent an email, and everything is already done. So let's go ahead and actually, I had closed my email. Let's go ahead and open email. And here's the email that is sent out. DNS A record provisioned successfully. FQDN web server 010. IP address 172.16.25.35. DNS view default. And info blocks record is this whole thing right here. So pretty awesome, huh? This is actually one of the coolest things I've seen in a little bit. Especially when you start looking at, okay, let's remove some of the stuff that's not super important out of my use case creation when I want to focus on the logic of what I want to do. I understand this is a very simple one, but you can start thinking about the kind of things that you could do. You could create multiple, specs and say, hey, these are all the components of my single project. Or even in a single spec, you can say, I want all these components. I was DNS A record. Then I want to provision an EC2 instance. Then I want to create, I want to create a VPC, then I want to create a certificate, an EC2 instance, then a certificate, and so forth. Imagine the amount of stuff that you'll be able to do like this, right? And for us, it took me, I don't know, I will say preparing the spec was very simple because I actually used an example that we had in the repository. I just simplified it so that it ran quicker. It's actually fairly simple to create a thing like this, but if you have a more complicated use case, you spend most of the time up front doing discovery, but then imagine the amount of things that you'll be able to do by saying I'm the automation engineer and I'm just taking instructions from somebody else that tells me, hey, this is the logic of the use case. Hopefully you enjoy that. I think this is a pretty cool demonstration of how to go and create an asset very, very, very quickly, to me like a 0 to hero, by just defining a spec and using the power of AI reasoning to create assets in the Itential platform. Thanks for tuning in.